to Flourish-Meant, the podcast on living life as you are meant to, so you can flourish. I am delighted to welcome today the esteemed Rick Whitted. Rick is the author of Outgrow Your Space at Work. He's also a speaker, career expert, and consultant. And he's also the person who encouraged me to start a podcast. He is a podcaster. So welcome with me, Rick Whitted, who's going to talk to us today about how to thrive in your career. Thanks for coming on today, Rick.
Thanks, Tina. It's good to be a part of your show. Glad you jumped out there in the world of podcasting.
I am too. I'm really enjoying it, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have you on here today with all of your expertise. I feel as though your platform and purpose just is a perfect fit for Flourish-Meant, because you talk about how to help people flourish in the workplace. What made you begin to get passionate about helping people thrive at work?
Years of managing others. I've been in corporate America for going on 3 decades. Can't believe that, 3 decades. And then, of course, just managing my own relationship. And I realized on countless occasions, both personally and in others, that I just saw these very short-term, very emotional career decisions that we made. And just somewhere along the line, I do believe it was just a gift from the good Lord. I began to connect how emotional our careers really are. So my space is really talking about how we emotionally filter our careers and what we use our careers for. And I don't think we're aware of that sometimes, that we use it to answer life's questions that it is not meant to answer.
I love that term, emotional filter, and I want to unpack that for just a minute. Tell us what we're talking about when you're saying the words emotionally filter your career.
Yeah, so something may be happening in your career, and the real question is, how are you processing what's happening in your career? People seem to be very motivated to be what we call promoted, right? Or progress, career progression. And yet usually I ask the question, why do you want a promotion in the first place? Just why do you want it? It's amazing how so few people ever ask themselves that question. And so the way it ends up working is you are defining promotion or progression in my career through a certain lens, and that particular lens is how you filter your where you are and what's happening in your career. And so if you read Outgrow Your Space in the first 4 or 5 chapters, I unpacked what those filters are, and I think there are 4 different definitions by which we define career progression. One is pay. It's a very obvious one. If my pay is not increasing, then my career is not progressing. For others, it's positional. If my position is not going up or my scope of responsibility is not increasing, then I'm not progressing. And those are kind of the traditional 2 that you will hear a ton about in the workplace and at the family reunion when you're asked the question, so what are you doing? But the other 2, which I have found are extremely valuable and are also the most prevalent in terms of career progression definition. One of those is what I call personal security. It's about relationship and trust. Doesn't matter how much money I make, doesn't matter how well I'm doing. If I don't feel you trust me, if I don't feel that you can develop me or grow me, if I don't trust you, my manager or the place I work, or if I don't feel you trust me, then I don't feel like I'm progressing no matter how well I'm really doing. And then the 4th definition is what I call personal satisfaction. It's this idea of purpose, and it's either my purpose is not work, it's what's outside of work. So work-life balance is critical for me, or it's meaning. Is there meaning in what I do? Is the work itself purposeful and meaningful to me? When you take those four definitions, I call them the 4 Ps of career progression. When you take those four definitions, you have a filter. And based on what you are looking for, and by the way, that's not always the right, you're not always looking through your actual value lens. That will determine how you respond to a career choice that's in front of you, or it will determine how you emotionally process that, what's happening to you in your career. It's a lot, but 4 Ps of promotion are the 4 filters.
That's a fascinating way of looking at how we can thrive in our career by finding our own motivation for what
Yeah.
we're doing. That's really a brilliant way of looking at that. And I know that you've done tons of research on this. Are you finding that people don't understand what their true motivations are?
Absolutely. So it's interesting, whenever I do a seminar or talk or keynote, I always ask the question to the crowd, tell me, what does a promotion mean? And almost without fail, you hear bigger job, bigger money, paycheck, more money. That's almost what you hear unanimously. Very few people say a trusting relationship with the person I work with or work for, or very few people. You hear more and more nowadays, work-life balance, those types of things. But for the most part, people do not identify, even if it's what they value, they don't identify those intrinsic values as career progression. And that puts us in a pickle, because based on almost 2,000 respondents to my career wit assessment, what I've found is almost 8 out of 10 people in the workplace, their primary core career value is either personal security, this idea of trust. The word I'm using lately for a P is preservation. Am I protected? Am I safe? Or the idea of personal satisfaction. Is there purpose to what I do? Those are 8 out of 10 people almost say that is my core career value. But the language often used in the workplace for success are not those things. It's, am I making more money? Am I moving up the ladder? And whether I want to move up the ladder or not, if I'm being told that's what success is, then even if I don't want it, I don't feel successful. And so people find themselves in this conundrum in the workplace, and it becomes an emotionally draining and or negative experience. And so, you think about your topic of, how do we really thrive in the workplace? I found you can be successful and not thrive. I have been successful and yet not thrive in the workplace by not focusing on what my core values are.
So the culture's definition of success is to make more money and have a higher position. But that is completely opposed to God's definition of success, which is obeying his purpose for your life so that you can be fulfilled. And in your research, you're finding that people, whether they're believers or not, are expressing their values line up with God's design, that they feel fulfilled only if they have a sense of purpose and a sense of relationship that they can trust and that they can feel comfortable with among the people they work with.
You nailed it. And so here's what's so interesting. The bulk of my audience are not faith-based audience. I'm typically out in the workplace and large and medium-sized corporations and companies. But you're right. The results show, as a matter of fact, almost 5 in 10, this idea of personal satisfaction. Is there meaning in what I do, or is there balance to what I do here? This idea of a purpose is the dominant core value at 45, 47%, somewhere around there. And then this idea of security and relationship and trust and growth is almost 4 in 10. And so you look at the idea of pay, and pay it's just a little bit over 1 in 10, about, or 12%. And then the position is maybe closer to 20, almost 20%. So you can clearly see just a little over 2 out of 10 people are actually, their core value is actually what the workplace is constantly, or the world is constantly speaking to. And so again, it's just really tough. If you don't know who you are, if you don't know what you value, it's almost impossible to feel successful in the workplace long term, because there are ebbs and flows. And I find people on just a blind career chase, and they're not happy.
This certainly explains why so many people are miserable at their jobs because they're seeking the wrong goals.
Well, and a shocking stat is almost 3.5 million people, if you look up the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the US, almost 3.5 people quit their job every month. And that stat has been consistent for more than 2 decades now.
Those statistics are absolutely staggering. And you've got to be finding, when you go into corporations, that the owners, the managers, the administrators of these corporations are realizing they're not setting the right rewards and values inside the company to address what people find as true motivations to work at their best.
So that's a very interesting uh, question and observation at the same time. I would say at the very top of the house, what I see is companies and businesses do understand that something's missing, that there's an intrinsic component to making employees, which ultimately makes customers feel valued. They know it's there, but somewhere between the top of the house and middle management, that gets blurred. And it really comes down to talking the talk of valuing the employee. But when you're talking career progression, or when you're talking the business, they don't know how to have that discussion. They don't know how to identify the core values of the workplace, and thus really speak their language in a way that motivates them. And so what happens is, it usually comes down to, Tina, just work really hard, do what I've done, and you stay at it, and you're doing great. And if you keep doing that, you're going to get a bigger job, and you're going to make more money.
And that's
And
supposed to make me feel better.
right, right. And so imagine if you're talking to someone whose core value, 8 and 10, right, whose core value is, but do I trust you, and do you trust me? So I'll play that out for you. If that's the conversation you have with me, and my core value, and it is my core value, is the idea of relationship and trust. That's my core value. So if you're telling that to me, well, that's great if I trust you. But if I don't trust you, and I don't think that you can develop or grow me, or I don't think that you have my best interest in line, or even if I want to trust you, but you've made it abundantly clear through micromanagement or something else that you don't trust me, then that's not resonating. Even if I'm your number one top performer, I don't trust you. And so even if I'm the best at what I'm doing, I feel like I'm dying. I feel like I'm in a box, that I'm not thriving, because my core value is not being met. And what you'll often hear is, when folks do exit interviews with top performers, they're usually shocked and surprised, like, why did they leave? I can't believe they left. Well, they may have just chose the money at another place, but it might have been because you weren't really speaking into their core value. You didn't understand what was important to them. And their idea of career progression was never money. Yes, they want to get paid for a good job. Yes, they want to progress in their careers, but not at the cost of that core value. And if I don't trust you, or if I don't think you trust me or care about me, if I don't feel safe or protected, then I'm out of here. All it takes is the right other P, whether that's my core value or not, the right position or pay comes along somewhere else, and they're telling me they love me and are going to trust me. I might lean to that way. And I see that happen all the time within the workplace.
It's interesting how few corporate managers are able to deliver what they promise at that entrance interview when they're promising, we really value you, you can trust us, we're going to give you a sense of purpose. And yet they follow through on so little of that. Where does that fall apart?
That is the right question, and I have scratched my head on this for years. And I probably did 4 or 5 years of research when I wrote Outgrow Your Space, and I missed this, and part of that was just I didn't know the answer. Here's what I've come to realize: I am a father and a husband, and we have 3 little children that are now grown. But I remember when they were younger. I particularly remember my middle child. It's my oldest daughter, and she was not having it in terms of sleeping in her crib by herself. She didn't care, very strong-willed, and she would cry and cry, and I refused for her to be in my bed. So this went on forever, and I was going to win, and she was determined she was going to win, and she's fearless. This was the kid that at 2 years old didn't know how to swim. It didn't matter. She'd just jump in the pool because it was fun. And so here I am. I gotten to the point where I literally had to lay next to her crib on the floor in the dark with my hand in the crib so she could feel my hand. And eventually she'd go to sleep. If I walked out there just a little too soon, it was on. She was screaming, I mean, at the top of her lungs. And after a while, I just would run back in there, get on the floor, put my hand in the bed, and she'd be staring at me in the dark like, how could you? How could you do this? So it's my point. If I could have skipped all of that, it would have been great. Everybody wants the baby born, potty trained, and paying attention. Managers are the same way. Everybody wants the baby born, walking and talking and potty trained. So the work of developing people and building up people and taking a raw skill and refining that skill, both the skill set itself, but then also the professional, what we call the intangibles in the workplace, developing that up, it's a lot of work. Human development in general is an icky, draining thing at times. It's a lot of work. And so what I find is middle managers don't want to put that work in. In fact, if you read The State of the American Manager, it's an excellent piece, 50-page plus piece of work done by Gallup. And they surveyed X number of millions of workers and workplaces. And here's what they found. Less than 2 in 10 managers have the talent of balancing both accountability and this message of respect, or I care about you, I love you. Less than 2 managers can really balance that, according to Gallup's study. And I mean, Gallup has polled millions of workplaces around the world. And then they say only one other could actually learn it. So it's something you have or you don't have. In the business world, we call that EQ, emotional intelligence. It's the ability to understand people. In the faith world, we call that discernment, right? Mm-hmm. It's this ability to understand people and get a sense of the pulse of like what's happening to that person as they're in the space that you're sharing with them. And workplaces don't look for that. They look for managers who are really, really good at the job. They look for technical proficiencies. Why? Because who wants to teach them? Who wants to train them? We want the baby born walking and talking. We don't want to go through this potty training stage with managers or with employees. And so when that happens, what happens is at the top of the house, we understand that this something is missing and that this intrinsic force that makes people feel valued is critical. but typically at the middle manager level, we have people who have worked hard, who are really, really good at producing the widget. And so we hire them to manage other people. And they have a ton of IQ for doing the job, but not necessarily a ton of EQ. And so what happens now, it's not all their fault because the higher ups actually hired them. So it's this cycle within many workplaces. And just for anybody who's getting the notion that we're talking about just corporate America, no, Main Street America is the same way. If I'm a business owner and I got a staff of 10 people, I'm looking for that one guy or that girl who's really, really good at the job. They know how to really make that widget, and I make them a manager. And I don't take the time to really understand if they have EQ, emotional intelligence. Are they good with people? Do they know how to talk to people? Do they walk away from an exchange with an employee and leave that employee with a deposit or a withdrawal? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what happens. I think we mean well at the top of the house often, but because the nature of business is what it is, which is make as many widgets as you can, as efficiently as you can, so we can make as much money as we can. That gets a little bit blinding in cultures. And as a result, many companies will try to strike a balance, but it usually happens at the middle management where we see people who are technically proficient, but deplete emotionally in interacting with others.
Can we train managers to be mentors? Because it sounds like that's what you're talking about, a mentoring relationship with your employees rather than simply administration and telling people what to do and giving them quotas and punishing them if they don't make them.
I think a better question, if I had to answer that, I don't know if it's mentoring, but I think a question that gets at the pulse of what I'm saying is, can you train people to by default naturally care about other people? And can you train people to really balance both holding a very firm line of accountability and yet delivering that message always with the person in mind first? And I don't know if you can train that. I think that's something you learn over time. I think the best teacher of that is experience. But often if you're a driver, if you push people forward and it gets results, regardless of the cost, unfortunately, businesses really will turn a blind eye often and they won't address it. Google did a study many years ago. They were trying to determine what made top performing teams great. This was a very long study they did. And they came up with 10 or 11 attributes for a top performing team. Number one was psychological safety. Am I safe? Number one. And they found that top performing teams, Aristotle Project, that's what it was called. So it's a fascinating study if you Google Aristotle Project in Google. The number one trait of top performing team was there was a high level of psychological safety. You were free to share. You were free to make a mistake. And that's a natural nurturing environment. And so can you teach that? I don't know. If I lean to Gallup's study, the state of the American manager, the answer is not really. There's maybe 20% of the population that either has it or can learn it. And so it's tough to say. I think we need to do a better job as businesses and companies and corporations of really identifying people who have both IQ and EQ, who have a sense of emotional intelligence.
So that would be the answer for the top level management to be able to thrive in their workplace. Let's look at the people who are not at the top of the food chain, so to speak, but are trying to learn how to thrive as lower management or not even management at all. They're still working on feeling successful in whatever it is they're doing, even though they're not at the top of their company. how can they begin to thrive in a way they never have before?
I think it is to embrace what we all kind of naturally know, which is my work was never meant to complete me. My work was never meant to define who I am and what I am. And yet, interestingly enough, when we meet people for the very first time, one of the first questions we ask inside of the first 5 minutes is what? So what do you do? So why do we do that? According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we spend close to 8.5, almost 9 hours between sleep and personal care, and most of that's sleep. Outside of that, work, we spend about 8 hours, and that's on average. That doesn't include people working 2 jobs or managers or owners. But on average, we spend about 8 hours. When you strip away sleep and you just look at our awake hours, we spend almost 55% of our awake time on the stage of work. And so what I think happens is subconsciously we end up using work to measure where we are in life. I may be talking career. If I got a no to something I really wanted, I may be expressing that in terms of my career or my career progression, but emotionally what I'm really filtering is this big question: is my life moving forward? Not my career, is my life moving forward? And because we do so much of life on the stage of work, in our careers and our, the giftings that we get paid through, because we do so much of that and spend so much time there at work, we end up using work to answer that question. It's not career progression we're emotionally dealing with. We're emotionally filtering life progression. And work was just never meant to answer that question for us, ever.
So the first step is to recognize my identity is not couched in my career. What would be the
Absolutely.
second way to know how to thrive at work? Because we still want to feel as though, since we're spending so much time at work, we are thriving to the best of our ability in that space.
Yeah, I think number 2 is know your core value. Know, from a career perspective, know your core career values. And I couch those as the 4 Ps of career progression, or the 4 Ps of promotion. You can go to careerwhitt.com. That's one word, career, WHITT.com. And that assessment will help you understand what your core career value is. And then secondly, it will tell you whether you're aligned with your core values. It will share what your emotional motivators are. Said another way, this may be your core values: security and relationship. But based on your answers, you have the potential for making your decision based on pay. So you're not aligned. And I would caution you to, when you're making a career decision, make it based on relationship, your core value, if that's indeed your scenario. So the career wit test will help you understand what's my core career value.
So, first, my career does not define me. Second, go to careerwit.com and take the assessment and find out what your core value is. And then, what is the next step someone needs to do?
Yeah, I think once you understand that, it's still a lot to unpack. I remember when I wrote this book, I was a national manager for a pretty large corporation in one of its divisions. And we were spinning down that group, and we had to displace some people and help them find other jobs. And so I was in that boat as well. And there was a regional manager opportunity that came up. And for the life of me, I'd spent 4 or 5 years writing that book. And I cannot tell you how real the emotional angst was for me. All I was thinking was, well, am I going backwards if I take this position? Are people going to think I'm not successful? I literally had to slap myself and go, wait, you just spent 5 years doing research and writing a book. What's my point? don't underestimate how emotionally impactful this really is. There's a reason when you get a no at work, it feels like a gut kick. There's just a reason for it. And so this knowing that is only the start. It's not even half the battle. It is the start. So I would say next, you really need to get yourself around good mentors. I love a quote by John C. Crosby, a business writer, who says, a mentor is a brain to pick, an ear to listen, and a shove in the right direction. As a matter of fact, in chapter 10 of Outgrow Your Space, I exclusively talk about finding and keeping a good mentor. And so I think you need to come around people who have wisdom, who can actually share with you, things that they've experienced, and who's been a little further up the road and found success and yet maintain integrity and ethics while they did so.
So find a mentor would be the next one. And then that mentor can help lead you through some other steps. Do you have another step that you want to mention, or do you want to leave people at the mentor stage?
Let me say this on the mentor piece. Most people can find mentors but can't keep them. That's what I found. Here's why. Well, first, mentorship is not a formal process. It's a relationship. Even if it starts formal, it's a relationship. I have mentors through the years who are now great friends, and we rarely talk about work when we do connect. It's how are the kids? They were 3, now they're 15. The secret to keeping and building a mentor relationship is to know that the responsibility for the relationship initially is on the mentee. You're going to the mentor because they have experience and advice and are often very busy, but those are the people who you can really learn from. So when you go to them, go prepared, be patient. And if they're not following back up with you, then, that's probably because they're busy. But I find most people's response to that is, well, they don't care. Well, no, it's not that they don't care. There's a reason you're going to them. They're spinning several plates. But if you're prepared when you meet with them, and for the Lord's sake, if they tell you to do something and give you advice, go back and do it. And then share the results of that with them and what worked and what didn't work. I just find most people go and ask for mentorships, but they don't own the relationship, and they translate that mentor not hands-on owning that relationship as not caring. And that's a big, big mistake. So just if you get nothing at all, if you can find a mentor, for God's sakes, keep them and take the time it takes to really develop those relationships. I think that's a good place to end this piece. The only other thing I would add, Tina, is that attitude is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the decisions about your career are made at tables you don't sit at. And the discussion at those tables, it's not performance, it's not quality of work or ethics. Matter of fact, those are the ticket. You don't even come up at the table if those things aren't there. Those are a given. We get paid to do a job, and we should all feel really guilty if we do 80% of the work but demand 100% of the pay. That's not why we get paid. But the decisions at the table are about attitude. Your attitude toward your current job. And I find many people get frustrated and they think they're better than their current job. So there's no humility, or humility doesn't last. It's attitude toward the people around you, both your manager, and I find many people don't engage and communicate with their managers and with peers. Are you a person that makes people better? If you left the job, they could always replace the role, but can they replace your impact to the culture? And then attitude toward the company, which is engagement. How long you've been there is not solely how you define loyalty. Loyalty is engagement. Do you have an engaged attitude? So attitude is everything in the workplace.
I agree. Attitude is everything, whether it's in the workplace or not. It's the
Amen.
one thing we have a choice about. We don't have a choice about our circumstances, but we always have a choice about our attitude. And it is one of the hardest things to make the right choice in if we're not happy. So I really appreciate the insights that you offer in Outgrow Your Space at Work and all the research that you're continually doing to that effect, because it helps people better understand how to adjust their perspective to line up with their heart, to line up with their God-given design. So that is a fantastic way to have the right attitude.
Amen.
So thank you so much, Rick, for coming on today. I want to make sure people stay connected with you because you have so much more to offer as a speaker and a consultant and as an author who's continually working on new material. So they want to be apprised of when new things are coming out and find a way to take the assessment and get a hold of Outgrow Your Space at Work. So how can people stay connected with you?
My name, rickwhitted.com, RICKWHITTED.com is the best way to get a hold of me.
That sounds wonderful. I'm so glad you came on today, and I'm so thankful for all of you who are listening and that you have the opportunity to stay connected with Rick. I hope all of you come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.